Right now, somewhere on this planet, a man is crying. Not because someone died, not because he lost his job. He's crying because 22 strangers he will never meet, wearing two different colored shirts, just kicked a ball into a net. In about 6 weeks, roughly half the population of planet Earth, more than 3 billion people, will stop what they're doing to watch this happen on repeat. Work will pause. Marriages will be scheduled around it. Wars have, on more than one documented occasion, actually paused for it. Nas, and here's the part that should bother you more than it does. None of this makes any logical sense. The outcome of a football match changes nothing about your food supply, your safety, or your ability to survive the winter. And yet your body does not know that. Your heart rate spikes. Your palms sweat. In some documented cases, your hormone levels shift in ways that are functionally identical to what happens to a soldier before combat. The question we're actually asking today isn't why people like football. It's why the human brain still can't tell the difference between a World Cup final and a battle for survival. To understand what's actually happening in that stadium, we have to go back. Not to the first World Cup in 1930. Not even to the first ball game in recorded history. We have to go back hundreds of thousands of years, to a time before language, before agriculture, before anything we'd recognize as civilization, to the exact evolutionary pressure that built the machinery now firing inside every screaming fan's skull. Because what you're watching in that stadium isn't really about football. It's a fossil, a living, breathing, behavioral fossil of how small human groups once decided who lived and who didn't. Let's start with something uncomfortable. Researchers who study fan physiology have found that men watching a competitive match, not even playing, just watching, show measurable spikes in testosterone when their team wins, and measurable drops when their team loses. This isn't a metaphor. This is the same hormonal signature seen in animals after a real physical contest for dominance or territory. Your cortisol, the stress hormone your body releases during genuine danger, rises during a close match to levels comparable to mild physical threat. Your heart rate can climb to levels associated with moderate exercise, just from sitting in a chair. None of this is voluntary. You cannot decide to feel calm during a penalty shootout any more than your ancestor could decide to feel calm when a rival group appeared at the edge of the forest. The body is running old software on new hardware, and it doesn't have a setting for, "This is just a game." So here's the actual question hiding underneath all of this. If the World Cup is genuinely meaningless to your survival, why does your body treat it like it isn't? The honest answer is that for most of human history, this exact response, the racing heart, the hormone shift, the total absorption in us versus them, was not a glitch. It was the single most important survival tool your ancestors had. And to understand why, we need to talk about something most people assume is uniquely human: organized group violence. It isn't. And where it actually comes from will change how you watch every match for the rest of your life. In the 1970s, researchers studying wild chimpanzees in Gombe, Tanzania, documented something that shocked the scientific world. Small coalitions of male chimps were conducting what researchers came to call boundary patrols. Groups of 4 to 6 males would move silently, in single file, to the edge of their territory. If they encountered a lone male from a neighboring group, they didn't just chase him off. They would coordinate, surround him, and in a number of documented cases, kill him. Deliberately. Repeatedly. Over years, this behavior eliminated entire rival communities. This is our closest living relative, sharing roughly 98% of our DNA, engaging in coordinated, planned, lethal group violence against outsiders. This wasn't an isolated incident. It's now been observed across multiple chimpanzee populations independently. Which raises an uncomfortable but important point. Coalitional violence. Small, organized groups of males using coordinated aggression against rival groups, likely predates humans entirely. We didn't invent tribal warfare. We inherited the wiring for it. Now here's the twist that connects this directly to your Saturday afternoon in front of the television. Researchers studying this behavior noticed something specific. The patrols weren't random aggression. They were calculated. Chimps only attacked when the numbers clearly favored them. 5 against 1, never 5 against 5. This is coalitional psychology in its rawest form, constantly, unconsciously assessing group strength before committing to conflict. That exact psychological machinery, the instinct to size up our side against their side before anything even happens, is still running in your brain right now, every single time you glance at the scoreboard. Chimpanzee behavior tells us where the wiring might have come from, but did early humans actually use it? For decades, this was pure speculation. Then, in 2012, archaeologists excavating a site called Nataruk, near Lake Turkana, in Kenya, uncovered something that changed the conversation entirely. The remains of at least 27 individuals, men, women, and children, dating back roughly 10,000 years, showing clear signs of violent death, skull fractures consistent with blunt weapons, obsidian projectile points still embedded in bone, bound hands on at least one individual. This wasn't a single fight that got out of hand. The pattern of injuries and the number of victims strongly suggested an organized, coordinated attack, one group against another. This predates agriculture. It predates cities. It predates almost everything we associate with organized conflict. Which tells us something important. Humans were forming identifiable groups, defending territory, and organizing lethal coalitional violence against rival groups long before we had a word for nation, let alone a word for team. So we now have two separate lines of evidence pointing at the same conclusion. Coalitional group violence appears in our closest primate relatives, and it appears in the human archaeological record as far back as we can reliably detect it. This wasn't an occasional aberration. It was, for a huge stretch of prehistory, a real and recurring threat. And any group that survived that threat needed something specific, a way to instantly know who was us and who was them, a way to bond tightly with your own coalition, and a way to get physically and psychologically prepared for conflict at a moment's notice. That exact bundle of instincts is what you are feeling, almost unmodified, every time you put on a national jersey. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. If coalitional aggression was such a powerful survival tool, why don't modern nations settle disputes with 22 guys and a ball instead of actual armies? The answer is, in a strange way, they sort of do, just not literally. Anthropologists studying traditional societies across the world have repeatedly documented something called ritualized combat. Structured, rule-bound contests, wrestling festivals, mock battles, ball games that allow rival groups to compete for status, resolve tension, and display strength without the catastrophic cost of actual killing. The Mesoamerican ball game, played across multiple civilizations for over 1,000 years, is one of the clearest examples. A genuinely competitive sport carrying enormous political and sometimes ritual stakes between rival cities. The theory researchers have converged on is called the ritualized warfare hypothesis. It proposes that organized sport didn't emerge separately from human conflict. It emerged as a controlled substitute for it, a way to get almost all the psychological and social benefits of tribal competition, group bonding, status display, dominance signaling, without anybody needing to die for it. This single idea reframes everything about what you're watching during the World Cup. It's not entertainment layered on top of ancient instinct. It is the ancient instinct just rerouted through a rulebook, a referee, and a 90-minute clock. The uniforms are tribal markings. The stadium is the boundary. The crowd is the coalition, and your body's reaction to all of it is exactly what evolution built it to do when two rival groups face off, minus the part where anyone actually dies. But knowing that raises the next question. If this is just old tribal instinct in a new outfit, why does it feel so specifically, powerfully emotional? Why do grown adults sob after a missed penalty? To answer that, we need to go inside the brain of a fan mid-match and look at exactly what's firing and why it's nearly identical to what fires in the brain of someone standing shoulder to shoulder with their tribe. By the way, if this kind of deep dive into the hidden machinery behind human behavior is exactly your thing, I put together an entire course on it called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, over 3 hours of content on the instincts we never talk about, what our ancestors feared, how they bonded, what actually kept small groups alive. There's an exclusive PDF guide included too. Links in the description. Now, back to the stadium. Before any ball is kicked, before any whistle blows, your brain has already picked a side, and it did it using a mechanism far older than nations. Across dozens of documented traditional cultures, from Amazonian tribes to Pacific Islander communities to pre-colonial African societies, groups preparing for conflict or major competitive ritual used a consistent strategy: visible, standardized markers, body paint, feathers, specific colors, specific patterns that instantly signaled group identity from a distance. The function was simple and critical. In the chaos of a confrontation, you needed to know in a fraction of a second who was your ally and who was your threat. Groups whose members were instantly identifiable had a coordination advantage over groups that didn't. This wasn't decoration. It was battlefield information technology, thousands of years before radios or uniforms. Now look at a World Cup crowd. Painted faces, matching scarves, flags worn as capes, chants that only insiders know the words to. This is not a modern marketing invention. It is the exact same identification system your ancestors used before a hunt, before a raid, before a ritual contest, rebuilt with polyester and face paint instead of ochre and feathers. And critically, your brain processes it the same way. Studies on group identity have found that people show measurably faster recognition and stronger emotional response to symbols of their own group, a flag, a crest, a color, than to neutral or rival symbols. That flag isn't just support. It's a modern tribal marker doing exactly the job tribal markers have always done, telling your nervous system in an instant, "This is my coalition." Here's a statistic that sounds mundane until you understand why it's true. Across decades of recorded football data, home teams win significantly more often than away teams, even when both teams are objectively similar in skill. Sports scientists have proposed several explanations: crowd noise affecting referee decisions, travel fatigue for the away side, familiarity with the pitch. All of these matter, but there's a deeper layer underneath them that connects directly back to Chapter 3's chimpanzee boundary patrols. Territorial defense is one of the oldest and most consistent behaviors across social animals, including us. Groups defending known territory, their territory, consistently show heightened aggression, heightened cooperation, and heightened performance compared to when they're operating in unfamiliar ground. It's not superstition that the crowd lifts the home team. It's the same underlying instinct that made a coalition of chimps more aggressive and more coordinated, defending their own patch of forest than raiding someone else's. So when 80,000 people scream in unison for their home team, they're not just cheering. They are, in the most literal evolutionary sense available to modern humans, defending shared territory as a coalition. The stadium is the forest boundary. The chanting is the coordinated show of coalition strength designed to intimidate a rival group before conflict even begins. This is exactly what boundary patrols did with silence and numbers. Modern fans do it with noise and numbers instead. Same instinct, completely different volume. In 1998, researchers studying male sports fans during a World Cup match measured something specific: testosterone levels before and after the game, in fans who had done absolutely nothing but sit and watch. The result? Fans of the winning team showed a measurable rise in testosterone. Fans of the losing team showed a measurable drop. This mirrors almost exactly what's observed in actual physical dominance contests, among animals and among humans in direct competition. The critical detail is that these men never touched the ball. They experienced a real biological win or loss signal purely through identification with a group they had no physical involvement with whatsoever. This is called the vicarious dominance effect, and it reveals something slightly unsettling about how deeply your brain fuses your own identity with your chosen tribe. When your team wins, some part of your nervous system genuinely, physiologically believes that you personally just won a contest for dominance and resources. This effect is strongest specifically in male fans, and researchers link it to an older evolutionary pattern. Males who were more physiologically and psychologically invested in group status and coalition success were, across evolutionary history, more likely to gain mating opportunities, resources, and protection through their group standing. Being emotionally fused to your tribe's success wasn't irrational. For most of human history, it was a genuinely accurate predictor of your own personal prospects. The problem is that this mechanism has no built-in filter for, "This no longer actually determines my resources or survival." Your hormones can't read a calendar. They just respond to the win. Let's talk about the crying, the hugging strangers, the synchronized roar that seems to erupt from an entire stadium as a single organism the instant the ball crosses the line. This phenomenon has a name in sociology, coined more than a century ago by Emil Durkheim: collective effervescence, the intense shared emotional energy that arises when a group performs a synchronized ritual together. Durkheim studied this in the context of religious ceremonies, but the underlying mechanism applies directly here. When large groups of people move, chant, or react in perfect synchrony, something measurable happens in the brain, elevated activity linked to reward and social bonding, alongside a release of oxytocin, the same hormone involved in bonding between parents and infants, and between long-term partners. A goal at the World Cup, and the explosion of synchronized noise, movement, and emotion that follows it, is functionally a ritual bonding event, chemically not that different from ancient communal ceremonies that once welded loosely connected bands into a single cohesive tribe. This is also why watching alone, on your own couch, at 3 a.m. never quite feels the same as being in the stadium, or even in a packed bar. The emotional payload of the moment isn't just the goal, it's the synchronized reaction of the group around you, confirming, instantly and wordlessly, that you belong to something larger than yourself. That confirmation, that sense of total belonging in a single suspended second, is precisely the psychological glue that once held small prehistoric coalitions together through famine, conflict, and migration. The World Cup didn't invent that feeling. It just built the biggest stage in human history for it to happen on. There's a well-documented psychological principle called loss aversion. The human brain registers the pain of losing something as roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the equivalent thing. This bias evolved for good reason. For most of human history, losing a resource, territory, status, a coalition member, could be catastrophic in ways that gaining an equivalent resource simply wasn't. Your brain still runs this calculation today, and it does not distinguish between losing actual resources and losing a football match your identity is fused to. This is why a loss in the World Cup can produce grief-adjacent behavior, genuine low mood, rumination, irritability that can last for days, while a win produces a shorter, sharper burst of euphoria that fades faster. The pain of the tribal loss is evolutionarily weighted heavier than the joy of the tribal win, because for most of human history, that weighting kept people appropriately cautious and invested in their coalition's fate. This is also the psychological engine behind something we need to address honestly, because it's the dark edge of everything we've discussed so far: football hooliganism and stadium violence. When the ritualized substitute for tribal conflict, the rules, the referee, the 90-minute boundary, breaks down, the underlying ancient machinery doesn't just disappear. It's still there, fully armed, looking for an outlet. Sociologists studying crowd violence have repeatedly found that hooliganism clusters around exactly the conditions our ancient coalitional instincts respond to most strongly: perceived threats to group status, territorial disputes over stadium space, and moments of humiliating group loss. It is, in the most uncomfortable sense possible, the ritual failing and reverting back to something closer to its ancient, unritualized ancestor. Step back from the stadium for a moment and look at the actual evolutionary math. A prehistoric human who felt nothing when their group won a contest for territory, resources, or status, who felt no elevated bonding during group rituals, who couldn't instantly identify friend from foe using visual markers, was at a genuine, measurable survival disadvantage compared to one who felt all of this intensely. Group cohesion wasn't a nice bonus for early humans. It was frequently the difference between a band that could defend its water source, coordinate a hunt, and pool resources through a bad season, and a band that fractured under pressure and didn't make it to the next generation. The instincts we've walked through: instant in-group identification, physiological investment in group success, synchronized emotional bonding, heightened loss sensitivity for the tribe, weren't separate quirks. They were a single, integrated survival system built by hundreds of thousands of years of selection pressure favoring humans who could function as reliable members of a coalition. And that's really the answer to the question we opened with. Your body doesn't know the difference between a World Cup final and a battle for survival because, for the vast majority of the time this exact psychological system has existed, there wasn't a meaningful difference. The stakes were always this high. The identification was always this immediate. The bonding was always this intense. The only thing that's changed in the last few thousand years is the object of all that machinery, from a rival band at the edge of the forest to 11 strangers in a different colored shirt on a patch of grass on the other side of the planet. Here's the genuinely staggering part. For nearly all of human history, coalitional bonding happened at the scale of a band. Dozens of people, maybe a few hundred at most, all of whom actually knew each other. The World Cup takes that exact same ancient psychological machinery and runs it simultaneously across more than 3 billion people who have never met, who don't speak the same language, who live on opposite sides of the planet, and somehow, for about 4 weeks every 4 years, briefly synchronizes an enormous fraction of our entire species around the same shared symbols, the same shared emotional peaks, the same instant identification of us and them. Nothing in the ancestral environment ever remotely approached that scale. Your ancient tribal instincts were built for a world of small bands. They are currently being run, completely unmodified, at a scale their original designers, evolutionary pressure over 300,000 years, could never have anticipated. So the next time you find yourself gripping the armrest during a penalty shootout, or screaming at a screen with total strangers in a crowded bar, or feeling genuinely, physically deflated for 2 days after a loss, understand what's actually happening underneath it. You are not overreacting to a game. You are running one of the oldest, most deeply embedded survival programs your species ever built. A program that once meant the difference between your ancestors' coalition surviving the next difficult season or not, now firing at full intensity over a ball crossing a white line. It looks irrational from the outside. From 300,000 years inside your own nervous system, it makes perfect sense. That's the real story behind the World Cup. Not a sport. A 300,000-year-old survival instinct, wearing a jersey. If you want to keep going deeper into the hidden instincts still running underneath modern human behavior, check out The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans, my full course, covering everything we don't have time to fully unpack here. Links in the description. See you in the next one.